everybody. Welcome to another edition of the Sales Development Podcast. I am so honored to be joined today by a great thought leader in our space. She's an author, consultant, and the author of two great books, one of which we'll dive in today called Sales Pitch. April Dunford, thanks for coming on the show.
Oh, it's so great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Oh my gosh. So I learned so much from the book Sales Pitch, and there's so much wisdom in there. You can tell that you've kind of been in the trenches and working on this for a long time. And
Yeah.
as someone on the receiving end of sales pitches, I was like, oh my God, everybody needs to read this book. How did you get into this and be able to condense your wisdom down into this book?
Oh, well, so this is a bit of a journey to get here, let me tell you. So my background is for 25 years, I was a repeat vice president of marketing. Occasionally I ran sales teams. Like sometimes I ran the inside sales team, and it's not unusual to have the VP marketing in a B2B tech company run the inside sales team too. And then sometimes I would run sales, but it was usually I only ever ran sales if the sales vice president got fired. And then they were like, lucky day for you, April. You now run sales too.
Potato.
It was usually temporary until they got somebody that knew what the heck they were doing. But so I did that for 25 years. My specialization is positioning. So about 8 or 9 years ago, I made the switch to consulting, and I work with B2B tech companies on positioning. And in a typical workshop that I do with companies, we're trying to get really tight positioning. And that means I've got the executive team together and we're trying to get really tight on who exactly do we compete with? How are we different? What's the value we can deliver that no one else can? What does a really good fit customer look like? And what's the market we intend to go in? And so I'm doing this work. And very quickly, I realized that if we do that and we get everybody straight around that, marketing knows what to do. Marketing takes that differentiated value and they go and they build messaging out of it. Sales, on the other hand, who's in this workshop, they're like, oh, this is great. This is great. Awesome. We love this. But then they leave the workshop and they're a bit like, they're not exactly sure how that changes the pitch.
Mhm.
And what I would find is that if we didn't work on the pitch when we worked on the positioning, then they would just sort of go back and keep pitching the product the way they were always pitching the product. So that was one thing that led me to this. The second thing was that when you looked at those pitches, they were surprisingly bad. and I'll describe bad in what way. So interestingly, on the marketing side of the house, we're very worried about positioning. Like we're very worried about, let's make sure that people understand why we're different. They understand why we're better. They understand why they would pick us versus the other guys. But often what I was seeing over in the sales side in a first pitch was something that looked a bit more like a product walkthrough. Like, the lead would go over there and they'd be like, okay, you clicked on the button that said, give me a demo. And that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to give you a demo. Look, there's 5 drop-down menus and we're clicking on all 5. And I'm going to go through every single thing in drop-down menus and talk about every single feature we have until we run out of time. And that didn't make sense to me. Like I was thinking, well, is that actually answering the question for the customer? Like, why pick you over the other guys? Like, because the customers are going to come in and they got questions like, does everybody have these features or just you? And like, how are you different than the other folks? And if I have to make a choice and pick you, like, why pick you over the other guys?
Yes.
And so I started teaching folks in the workshops I was doing how to take their positioning and translate it into a sales pitch. Now, I had a sales pitch structure that I learned how to do like 25 years ago when I was first introduced to a structure like this when I worked at IBM. And IBM did not come up with it. They actually learned it from, they had done some work with this company called the Corporate Executive Board, who are famous for writing a book called The Challenger Sale. And so at IBM, we had this very specific pitch structure that we used that was designed just for IBM. So a lot of it didn't apply. Like if I looked at the pitch structure and I to take it to another company, it wouldn't really make sense because IBM deals are very, very big and very long sales cycle. But there was a handful of things I really loved about that pitch. Like one was they never did this feature dump ever. So what they would do is they would never talk about features outside of the context of the value. So they would say, we're going to save you $2 million a year doing this, and here's how we do it. And then they would talk about the features. So that was one thing. It was always value and then features, value and then features. The second thing was that they did a very good job talking to the company about their point of view on the market. So they never started a pitch with, here's us, IBM, and let us tell you about IBM. They never started a pitch even with like, here's the problem. Like, let me tell you about the problem that you have. They would start with, here is our perspective on the problem. Like, we know this problem exists. Because you're the customer, you're the expert in your own problem. But we're the experts in solutions, and we have a point of view on this problem. And we think the root of this problem comes from this. And so there would always be this setup that was like IBM's insight into the market. Anyways, when I left IBM, I went to a little startup and we did a repositioning there. And I stole some concepts from this IBM pitch structure, and that worked really well. And then I've been using an evolving version of this pitch structure ever since. So I thought when I first started doing this positioning work, I thought, well, okay, we're going to have to teach folks how to take the positioning and turn it into a sales pitch. And I just assumed, well, there's a sales pitch structure out there that everyone uses, right? And then I looked and it turned out actually not really. And then I thought, okay, well, I'm going to have to teach folks that. And then after doing it with like 100, 200 clients, I thought, well, I should just write this down in a book and then everybody could use it. Like, I think there's lots of ways to build a good sales pitch, but starting with a structure is better than starting with nothing. And so if you don't have anything and you want to go build it, my structure, I think, is one structure you could use to start with. So that's how the book came about. It was sort of a long, winding road, to be honest.
It's so interesting because it starts with that positioning workshop. It goes down to the roots because if
Yeah.
you thought that if I work with everybody and we get a great positioning statement and we've got all the deck is ready to go, we hand it off and they're just going to run with it. And it's just,
Yeah.
nope, that's not what happened.
Not at all. Not at all.
We'll have to do another podcast, but just the positioning workshop and that you have another book there. All I can read, it says awesome.
It's called Obviously Awesome. It's this one here. If you're watching the video. Yeah, Obviously Awesome is the first book, which was designed to teach you, my methodology for doing positioning. So if you thought your positioning wasn't very tight and you wanted to work on that, you could take that book and it'd be like step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Here's how you're going to fix it.
Okay.
The second book is the same thing, except it's like,
yeah,
the second book's the same thing, except it's like, okay, you got that. Now you want to take that positioning and turn it into a sales pitch. Here's what the structure should look like. And it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. These are the piece parts of the pitch deck. And here's how you build it.
Okay. So if you're newer to this, then you really need to get both of the books and sit down and see the positioning roots, in the ground first, get that worked out, and then move to the sales pitch part of it.
I would say sometimes, but not necessarily. Like a lot of the companies I work with, one of the reasons the pitches aren't so great is because the company doesn't have really tight positioning. So, if you ask around the company, the people in the company are not in agreement about who do we compete with and how are we different and why pick us over the other guys? Like, so we can't go build a good sales pitch unless we have good answers for that stuff. But some companies do have very good answers for that stuff. And so they don't have a positioning problem. And you have positioning, whether you like it or not, whether it's weak or not. But if your positioning is strong, then there's nothing stopping you from just taking the sales pitch book, taking that positioning and then building a pitch out of it. And I know companies that have done that. Lots of companies have called me and said, oh yeah, we just bought your book. Did you think I had a neat call from the CEO of a big publicly traded company? And he said, I got your book for Christmas. Somebody bought it for him. And he said, and I sat down for a week and I redid the sales pitch for the company. And 2 weeks later, we did it at the sales kickoff meeting. And he never talked to me. Like he just did it on his own.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Is that
And he
good?
never read the first book. He went straight for the second one because their positioning was already really good. He just didn't like the way they were pitching it.
Got it. Okay. All right. So that totally makes sense. And what I'm thinking back, the RSA conference was a couple months ago.
Oh,
And
I've been to that conference. So
oh
big.
boy. Okay.
You know
So
what? I think I
yeah.
actually got COVID at that conference.
Oh
So,
my
well,
God.
I didn't actually go to the conference, but in 2020, that RSA conference was happening. And I happened to be in San Francisco that week and was staying at one of the hotels where all the RSA people were staying. And then I flew home, and on the flight back, everybody was coughing and
Oh,
all this stuff.
okay.
And then 3 minutes later, we all went into lockdown and didn't leave our house again for like, a year.
Oh,
And I got COVID, which I suspect from that flight. But I think, and then the news, it was all over the news in 2020 that RSA was like some kind of super spreader.
super spreader. Okay. Well, that was the del.
I'm
Oh,
laughing about it now, but it wasn't funny at the time.
no, no, yeah. How we can look back on it. Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
that's where I got it. But and I know, and lately, I live here in San Francisco, and I've been like, I need to get out of my house, so I'm down there. Every once a week, I'll just any event, just get me in front of
It's
people.
big, that one.
Hopefully, we won't
RSA
get
is really
COVID.
big.
But the reason I bring that up is I was at the Moscone Center, and you come down the escalator, and there's 600 vendor
Right.
booths, and from big to small. But the first one down at the end of the escalator was Gartner, and they had
Interesting.
their big triangle, square, and they, the point I'm trying to make is, as far as positioning, it's like I can't go talk to 600 different
Right.
vendors that day. Just give me the
Right.
top three and a map, and I'll go talk to them. And
Exactly.
so that's about positioning. And sometimes people call me and they go, "What does 10 bound actually do?" And I'm like,
Right.
"Oh my God. Okay, so I need to get your first book and figure."
Well, so like this, like, I'll tell you something that we really underestimate
Yeah.
inside tech companies. We underestimate how hard it is to be a buyer.
Okay.
And this is how it works. Like we're building something and we've been working on it for years, right? And we're this close to it, and we know all about the vendors in the space. We know what the state of the art of the technology is. We know what's possible and what's not possible with the technology. But in B2B, typically what you've got is a buyer that, maybe they're buying for themselves, or maybe their boss has said, look, Joey, go find us new accounting software because our accounting software sucks. So you go out, figure that out, and come back here and you tell me what accounting package to buy, and then I'm going to write you the check. And Joey's sitting there, and Joey goes, like, I use accounting software, but Joey's not an expert in accounting software. He doesn't know who the vendors are. Most of the time, the person we're selling to has never bought a solution like ours before, ever. Because how often do you buy stuff? It's not that often. So they go to buy. The first thing they got to do is get themselves educated. And so they're Googling and they're looking at, and there's 9,000 products that look exactly like yours. And every single one says, we're the number one accounting software, and like, how's this guy supposed to figure this out? And his job is to make a short list, figure out which one to buy, get everybody aligned on that, and then make the recommendation to his boss. So, they get on the call with us and we're like, feature, 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 feature. And they don't want that. What they actually want is like, how are you different than this other company that I just talked to? And why should I pick you over them? And I'm a little company. Are you for little companies or are you for big companies? Who are you actually for? And like, I don't know what half these features are. Can you explain it to me? Like, do I actually care that this thing has AI or doesn't have AI? And what's that AI actually going to do for me? Like, we underestimate how hard that is. And
Yeah.
so we think our job is to answer the question, why pick us?
Okay.
But that's not the job. The job is to answer the question, why pick us over the other guys? And we do a very bad job of that in general in a first sales call. Now, if we get into the second, third, fourth sales call, we might get into the gory details of it. But in a first sales call with a customer that doesn't know too much about us, and our whole job is to make sure that we get on the short list and stay on the short list, we're often just throwing a whole bunch of stuff at a person that is already overwhelmed with stuff.
Exactly.
Like
Oh,
customers
great
are
example.
never before have customers had access to so much information. Like they can go on your website, they can go on G2 Crowd, they can go download the Gartner reports and all this stuff. They are drowning in information.
Okay.
But what they starve for is insight. So everybody says they're number one. Everybody says they've got this great list of features. Everybody says they have this stuff. Like, is that better or worse? Like, I don't know. And so our job as salespeople in that situation is to act as a guide. Our job is to actually help them understand what their choices are and what the trade-offs are. And to say, look, man, we're in this space. We know all about this.
Mm-hmm.
So if you look at the whole space, there's three ways to solve the problem. You could approach it like this. And there's a bunch of vendors that do it this way, and they're good for this, but not good for this. Or you know what? You could approach it like this. And there's vendors there, and they're good at this stuff and bad at this stuff. We have designed a system for people that look like this, that want this. So if you look like this and you want this, you should pick us because we're the only ones that can deliver this value. The other guys can't do it. That's what they really want. And it's rare that a customer actually gets that in a sales pitch, but we could. There's no reason why we don't do it.
Yes, and so then I wanted to ask you, define the insights, and that's exactly what you just gave me. Those are the
Yeah.
insights that you're bringing.
Like
The
it's
wider view of the problem, the 30,000 foot view.
well, it's that. And it's all like one way to think about it is like your product was built because somebody saw a gap in the market. Like the founder woke up and said, you know what sucks? Databases. They all do this like this, but if we had a database that did this other thing, that'd be amazing. So we built a different product because we saw this thing, like we had this insight that something different was needed. So like, I'll give you an example. So I work with a company called Level Jump, and they do sales enablement software. So it's software for training sales reps. I mean, if you're in the sales world, you know what a terrible market this is. Like, there's all kinds of companies that do sales enablement software. There's so many of them. And now, when I worked with Level Jump, the first thing we looked at was the positioning. So it was like, well, who do you compete with? Well, there's kind of two types of sales enablement software on the market. Some of it is just like a CMS or a content management system. Like you put all this sales materials in a nice structured drive, and you got version control, and you can tell who's accessed what. And that's, it's just a nice place to put your sales stuff. Or if you're being really fancy, you have an LMS, which is like a learning management system where I can set up a course and the reps take the course and I can tell how far through the course they were and they get certified and whatever. So Level Jump is a bit like those, except their big differentiator, their differentiated thing is they're the only one that's built inside of Salesforce. So then you say, okay, well, that's just a feature. So you're built on Salesforce. So what? What's the value of that? Well, turns out the value of that is because they're built inside Salesforce, they're the only ones that can actually take enablement data and Salesforce data together. So what they can do is they can measure, did the sales enablement improve sales metrics? Meaning, did it improve time to first deal? Did it improve time to make quota? So now we get to the sales pitch part of this, right? Now, how do you pitch that? So if you look at the way a typical pitch would go with sales pitch with something like Level Jump, they'd be pitching to the head of sales enablement. Head of sales enablement would come in and they'd be like, okay, let me show you all the features. Here's how you log in. Here's how you set up the sales training. Here's how you set up a course. Here's how the reps will take the course. Here's how they do it. Feature, 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 feature. And at the very, very end, you might say, oh, by the way, here's how you measure it. Now, does that sound any different than a CMS? Not really. Does it sound any different than an LMS? Not really. Why pick you over the other guys? Who knows? Right? It does a lousy job of communicating that. Instead, we could structure the pitch where we start with our insight. An insight driven pitch would be like this. I'm sitting across from the head of sales enablement and I go, hey, head of sales enablement's pretty important, right? Well, yeah. Why is it important? It's important because every day your rep's not making quota costs you money.
Yeah.
That's why it's important. So what we really want to do is accelerate the rep getting to quota. Now, how do we do it? Well, look, we got choices. We could put everything in this nice CMS thing, and there's all kinds of vendors that do that. And we could organize things, and I could see who looks at what. Or I could get really fancy and make courses out of it and certify people, and they're going through the courses. But do either of those things actually tell you whether or not your stuff worked? Like when your boss asks you, head of sales enablement, did that enablement actually work? Did it improve time to first deal, time to make quota? How do you prove it? Wouldn't it be great if we had a solution that did that? Now, if my head of sales enablement says, yeah, actually, that would be great. Then I say, great, let me show you this thing. And then I forget about all the stuff that all the other guys do. And I go right into that. Look, we're the only guys that can actually produce a report that you can show to your boss that say, look, we improved time to first deal by 2 weeks. We improved time to make quota by a month. And here's how much money that saved us. That's a completely different pitch. And as you can imagine, much more effective.
Yeah.
Level Jump guys actually got acquired by Salesforce last year.
Wow.
So they don't exist anymore. So that's why they don't mind me using their pitch. But
okay. Yeah.
But that's an example of what this insight is, right? Like they're starting with their perspective on the market. Their perspective on the market is, we want to train the sales reps, right? But what's the point of all this training if I can't measure how it impacted the sales metrics? Like that's actually the key thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so if someone's out there right now and they're going, okay, wow, I do have the positioning. I've got the positioning I think is down. I don't have the structure to be able to do this in my own life. The sales enablement guy said to do it the old way, and I'm losing sales, and people are zoning out. Where should they start to reposition the sales process the way that you see working?
Yeah. So the way it works is, so in my structure, I have a structure, and there's two pieces to the sales pitch. There's a setup and a follow through. Okay. The setup is all about the market. It's not about you. So the setup is where we're kind of painting a picture of the whole market so that the customer feels comfortable that they understand what their choices are. So in the setup part, we start with our insight, like, here's how we look at the world. And then we say, look, like you have choices. There's different approaches you could take to this problem. And here's the pluses and minuses of the other approaches. And then we end the setup with, like, can we agree? Like, if we agree that this is the root of the problem and we agree that there's this is what works and doesn't work and the things that are out in the market right now, can we agree that a really good solution for a company like you would actually tick these boxes? And then if I can get the customer there in this setup where they go, yeah, we agree with that, then you go, great. Now, like the deal is mine to lose at this point. So at this point, I switch gears, and what I'm doing is showing them how my product does that.
Okay.
So in order to build this pitch, there's a set of inputs, and the inputs come from your positioning. So I need to understand what the alternative approaches are to solving the problem. I need to be able to describe the pluses and minuses of those approaches, or else I can't do this setup thing where I build a picture of the market. And I need to start by framing it around this insight. Like the insight is kind of like, what does a customer have to understand in order to understand our value? Like in my previous example, like if you don't understand that, time to make quota or time to make first deal, if you don't understand those are important metrics, then you don't understand why our stuff is valuable, because I'm going to give you those metrics. So I need to start with that insight, move to painting a picture of the market, get the customer's agreement on, can we all agree, like a good solution needs to tick these boxes. And then the rest of the pitch is about us, where it's like, okay, here's us, here's what we do, here's the value we can deliver, and here's how we do it. So the bulk of the time is spent doing that the same way you would in a good sales pitch otherwise. The difference is we're doing this little setup at the beginning to give you some context help you understand what your other choices are, and help you understand how we're different.
Yeah. And I think it sounds like just admitting that there's an information overload out there, and buyers can do a lot of it. There's always that stat that they do, 70% of their research before talking to a sales.
Yeah,
And just realizing like you're not dealing with information starvation. It's
it's
information
overload.
indigestion. Yeah, there's too much. So as the salesperson, you have to set that context at the beginning and
Exactly.
help them to see the bigger picture.
That's exactly it. Like
Okay.
your job as the rep is to help them make sense of all these facts. Like they
Okay.
have a limitless number of facts. They've spent way too long researching this stuff, but
Yeah.
they don't know how to back up and look at it big picture. Like
Yeah.
I know these guys do this and these guys do that. Do I understand why it's important? Maybe not. Right? Do I understand if either of these things are important to me? Maybe not. And how does this relate to us? In our thing that we're trying to sell, like there's a lot of stuff that we have to teach customers. I think we have to assume the attitude that we're not actually selling people, we're helping them buy. So our job is to act as a guide. And I'm going to give you the rubric and I'm going to give you the tools you need to figure out what trade offs you want to make on this solution. And I hope you pick mine because I've made the case for it. But, it's your choice to figure out what approach makes sense for you.
Yeah. And I think it's hard for salespeople to think about it that way for most people. The great salespeople just do this naturally,
I
but
think so.
the masses, like, me, everybody else, it's you get quota breath. I don't know if you've ever heard that, where you're under a lot of pressure to
Yeah.
sell and you're
Oh,
only
no kidding. Yep.
63% of quota. So you go in just thinking about yourself. And I
Guns blazing.
dump all these features.
Right.
If I keep showing these slides to people, they're going to be so impressed that they're just going to buy it right now.
Yeah.
And this is a completely different way to look at it.
Well, and it's interesting when you look at the data on this. So there's a great book out there by this guy Matthew Dixon, and it's called The Jolt Effect. And what Matt Dixon's book did was he looked at it was during COVID when everybody was doing their sales calls over Zoom, and they recorded the calls with Gong. So they looked at 2.5 million sales calls. So a lot of sales calls. And they did it with the company's permission, right? So the company gave them the sales calls, and then they looked at, well, which of these calls were successful or not successful? Did they ultimately close the deal or not close the deal? Did the deal progress and all that stuff? And so they looked at a bunch of very specific sales tactics. And so one of them was like, if you had a client that was kind of dragging their feet, it's common for a sales rep to sort of pull the FOMO card and be like, and try to pressure them, right? Like, come on, like you need to get on this boat. Like all your competitors are doing this and you're not doing this. And, if you don't get this done this quarter, it's very bad and bad things will happen to you. And what the data in that book showed is that kind of high pressure, trying to get the customer to move faster when they're in a state of feeling like maybe this is the wrong decision, maybe I'm not making the right choice here, actually has the opposite of the intended effect. So you are
Yeah.
more likely to kill the deal than you are to move the deal forward. Because the problem is the customer is actually just stressed out. They're stressed out about making the wrong decision. They're stressed out like maybe I make this decision and I get fired. And so what they actually need in that situation is reassurance that this isn't a bad decision. And so the question we have at that point is how do we take the risk out of this deal?
Okay.
And so there's ways we can do that. One is to make sure that they understand their options and they understand why they're picking us and not the other folks. But then there's other things we can do to take the risk out of the deal, like, like, and companies hate this, but sometimes, the entire deal becomes at risk because the customer is waffling on things and worried about what if I get in trouble? And so sometimes making the deal smaller or splitting the deal up into phases or chunks will help it get over the line because it feels less risky.
Mhm.
Um, sometimes we've got things at our disposal, like, money back guarantee, or if we don't, if we don't hit the targets, we're going to let you out of the contract, things like that. Things that, bring down the risk of making the actual decision are actually much more effective in that situation than pushy, like, come on, we got to get this done. The other thing that doesn't work that is surprising is discounts. So if the customer is stalling because they're feeling like this is risky, maybe I'm making the wrong decision, a discount actually doesn't work at all to move them forward.
Because it's not necessarily about the money. It's more
It's not
like
about the money. It's not about the
I
price. It's about the risk.
I just thought of a new acronym. Instead of FOMO, it's FOMU. So fear of messing up. Like
Yeah, that's
like
exactly it.
you're gonna get in trouble, if this thing
It's
doesn't work.
exactly it.
Okay.
And so customers are much more worried about messing up than they are about missing out. Much
Okay.
more.
So make it easy. Make it a trial period. We're gonna show the value. You can
Or
get out of
something,
this anytime. Something like
right?
that. And that's easier said than done if you're the
Well,
founder.
and the big one is educating them about the other options. Like the root of a lot of this worry is I picked the wrong option. There's another option out there that's better, and I just don't know why it's better or how it's better, but it's better. So if we do a good job of painting the picture and saying these guys are like this, these guys are like this, and you feel like you've been educated, then you're much more likely to say yes to the deal because you understand why you made the choice you made.
Yeah, it totally makes sense. Oh, I could talk to you forever. Um, if you're yeah a newer rep and you're getting into this, you just got the job and yay, I'm selling VPN, DNS,
Yay.
yeah, cyber packages. Okay, so the point I'm
Your
trying to make.
spirit hasn't been crushed yet. You're still in the yay, I'm selling phase.
Oh my gosh, I know. Come and talk to us. We'll tell you. Um, So, how do you go from being, I was just in college, 2 years ago, to now I'm an industry analyst, expert who can give you a 30,000 foot view? And I'm just being facetious, but really,
Yeah,
the value that we're bringing is you're essentially becoming like an analyst and a
a
consultant,
little bit.
a
Yeah,
pushy salesperson. So,
a little bit.
how do they start in, getting into the industry and learning all that stuff?
Well, I think the best thing that a rep can do is leverage the resources that they have at their disposal inside the company. So, your product management team knows this stuff.
Okay.
A lot of times the marketing team knows this stuff. They're not necessarily giving you the things they should be giving you to help you sell in this way, but they know it. Like if you went to the product management team and said, like, if I had to take all the competitors in this market and put them into buckets and talk about the pluses and minuses of different ways of solving this problem, could you do that? Your product manager could do that in a heartbeat with their eyes closed. And so, you can try and figure this stuff all out on your own, but I guarantee you there are people in the company that already know this. They're not necessarily building you a deck that does it, and in a perfect world, they would be. But they know the answers to the questions, right? They know what the alternatives are. They know the pluses and minuses of the alternatives. So, if you're over there and you're having lunch with the vice president of sales or somebody senior on the product team, like, you need to be asking the questions like, what are the alternatives to our solution and why pick us over everyone else? Because this is what you're going to have to build a pitch around.
Yeah.
Like, why pick us versus the other guys? And the more you understand that, like, what the trade-offs are for a customer, that if they go this way, they're going to get this, but not this. If they go this way, they're going to get this, but not this. And if they go with us, they get XYZ. And customers that look like this really need XYZ. Maybe not other kinds of customers, but these ones do. The more you can understand that and tell that story, the better you're going to be.
Okay. And when you go into these companies, sometimes you don't have to name names. We're not going to hold it back. But do you ever find that like you start looking for this information and it's not there? And they might even be an established company that has salespeople and stuff, and you're just like, where is this information?
Do you know where it is? It's
Okay.
sitting in the brains of the senior executive team.
Okay.
So my job when I come in as a consultant,
Hmm.
this is exactly what I am doing. So I am assembling a cross-functional team. I got head of product, head of sales, head of customer success, founders together in the room. And it's my job to come with a process and a methodology to pull the information out of them. Like, I'll tell you something else. Sales knows a bunch of stuff that the rest of the team doesn't know either. And if they did, they'd be way smarter. So when we do this positioning stuff, we often start with the idea of, well, if you didn't exist, what would a customer do? And nobody understands that better than sales because they're talking to customers every day. So they know what the customer's status quo is. They know how they're getting the job done today. Maybe they're using a spreadsheet, maybe they're doing it manually, or maybe they're using some old crappy legacy thing. Sales also knows who else lands on a short list against them because they're fighting it out day to day against these people. If you go and ask product management or marketing, they might have a really different opinion about who our actual competition is out on the ground. But you know who knows the truth? Sales knows the truth. Mm-hmm. Now, if I get to the next step, okay, well, we compete against Salesforce. And then if I were to ask the question, well, what have we got that Salesforce doesn't have? Sales might not know the answer to that question, but product management does.
Yeah.
They're responsible for that. So your product management team knows exactly what capabilities our product has that your main competitor doesn't. And then we've got to distill that into value, which is where marketing can help. And then, you often have a founder that has a really good big picture view of how this stuff all comes together, but you don't get any time with the founder. like all that information is locked in their head. So when I come in to do a positioning workshop, the first order of business is let's get everything out of everyone's heads and get it on the table. And now let's look at the positioning. And then once we have that, we go, okay, so this is where we're actually at. Now let's build the sales pitch that reflects that. And we'll get something guaranteed that's way better than the existing pitch.
And now we can plug it in. And do you ever find that you do the workshop and you come out and it's completely different than what they had been working off of before?
Sometimes.
Okay.
Like sometimes it's really different. Sometimes it's like, I would say the majority of the time, if the company is in market and they're a decent size, it's not that the pitch looks completely different, but it's way tighter. Like usually that's what we get is the pitch kind of getting the job done. I mean, otherwise you wouldn't be making 50, 60, 70 million revenue. But it could be so much better. It could be so much clearer. Like you're still leaving the customer to do a lot of mental work of trying to figure it out. And so usually the pitch is trying to communicate too much, too oriented on features, not oriented enough on value, doesn't do a good enough job really of contrasting your approach versus other approaches to the problem. So a lot of times what we have at the end is, I just did one this week, for example, with a company but it has this really, really innovative thing. Like it's so cool. And it's in the data management space. And I've done a lot of stuff in the data management space. And when they send me their pitch deck that they use in sales, and they're fairly successful doing a decent amount of revenue, like I'm telling you, I've spent a lot of time in that space and I didn't have any clue what those guys did. It was a long pitch deck. There was 45 slides. And I was like, I think I get it, but I'm not so sure. At the end, what we had is a thing that was 8 slides.
Wow.
And right to the point. Yeah. And was the positioning all that much different? I don't think the positioning was that much different, but it was a way better story, just way clearer, made it absolutely clear. You could do this, you could do this. We do this thing, which is completely different, but doing it in this completely different way unlocks all this value that you simply cannot get using anything else in the market. That's the pitch. And do that in like a handful of slides instead of blah, 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 blah. So a lot of times that's what we're getting to. It's not all that different, but it's just way tighter, way clearer, way more compelling.
People attempt to do this. I went to a couple of QBRs for companies in the spring, and I think people attempt to do this. But it's not a structure. They need to call you and have you come in because
yes, they do.
Call April right after this. They've got this boring slideshow from the product marketer, and he's droning on, and half of the sales reps are looking at their phones, and they're very disengaged. And I'm sure that it's also on the sales reps too to be in that conversation, because probably the ones that are super engaged are the ones that make quota, and the ones that are on their
Yeah.
phone are like looking for another job. I don't know,
Well,
but
I don't know. I do think
yeah,
there's a lot of magic that comes from having cross-functional teams work on this stuff, right? So,
yeah,
the worst sales pitches I've ever seen are ones that marketing attempts to do without talking to anybody else.
yeah.
And what they end up with is this fluffy marketing thing that the salespeople get it, and they're like, "What do I do with this?" This like,
They make their own sales deck.
exactly. They throw
Wow.
it out and they make their own thing because the deck they got from marketing doesn't actually do what they need it to do, and or it isn't very
Totally.
compelling. So I think if we have a cross-functional team that's got marketing, product, and sales together, first we can work on the positioning, but then when we get to the sales pitch deck, like it's good to have these teams working together, because if marketing does it on their own, like they don't understand a lot of stuff that sales people do. Like a lot of marketers don't really understand what discovery is and how a rep needs to do discovery. They don't really understand objection handling. They don't really understand how negotiation works in a deal because they don't do that stuff.
Yeah.
And so,
Our company.
so they'll build a pitch deck that doesn't necessarily meet the needs of the sales team. If sales is involved, then sales can make sure that the output, like the actual thing we get at the end, actually works in a sales situation.
It's something that we can use. And then, okay, this is so interesting. We need to do round two. Last question. So, if you probably most of your business comes from people that you've worked with before, and they're sitting at the country club, and they go, "Oh God, you got to call April, right?"
The
Does it-
country club.
does anybody that they're
Where
on their
those
yacht
startup founders
somewhere?
hang out.
Sorry, that's the best I could come up with. But
Some of that,
does,
yeah. Like
does
some of that was the big company guys, I think, are hanging out at this
yeah,
country
oh
club,
sure.
maybe.
Now, does anybody come to you and they go, okay, I'm talking to, Bob Jones, Steve Stevens, I'm making up names, but they're
Yeah, yeah,
and April
yeah,
Dunford. So what's the difference between
yeah.
you and them? Does anybody ever bring you that, or
Totally. Like, I mean, all the time. I mean, like again, I think very few things in the land get purchased without looking at alternatives,
okay,
And so, for example, a lot of times companies come to me and they want to tighten up their positioning. They want to work on their pitch deck, but they're also thinking, hey, maybe we need to do a refresh on the website and a bunch of other stuff. And they've got an agency that does that.
sure,
And a lot of times the agency will say, "Oh yeah, positioning, we do that too. Oh, sales pitch, yeah, no problem, we do that too." And these agencies don't major on that stuff, right? So often what we end up doing in those situations is, we keep the agency for, we're going to do a refresh on the homepage. We're going to want to make the sales pitch deck look pretty, and your agency's great at that. But you got to give them stuff. When they say they do positioning, they're going to come and ask you, who do you compete with, and how are you different? What's your value?
yeah,
And so what we're going to do is work on the stuff that's going to be the input to the agency to make them great. So that's one alternative. There's other folks out there that do positioning. Like I would say I'm very specialized. Like I only do B2B. So there's some folks out there that will do tech companies, but they could do consumer tech and B2B tech and all kinds of stuff. I only do B2B, and I only do B2B where there's a sales team. And so there aren't a lot of folks out there that are focused on that niche of like more enterprise software, more big ticket stuff, more stuff that's a bit more complicated. And so the reason you pick me is because I've done it 300 times. I wrote the book on it. I'm reasonably well known in this space. So
yeah.
your chances of getting a successful outcome are higher if you go with me than if you go with, some kid who's 28 who's done it twice that says, "Trust
Right.
me."
Hey, I got this. And it's like
So
there's a
there's a bit of
Swiss
that.
Army
Yeah. So
knife,
there's like, everybody's got competition.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, yeah. But it's
Oh,
interesting.
I had a call. This first time this happened to me. I had a call from a really big company 2 weeks ago.
Okay.
And they said, "Well, we've narrowed it down to two, April." And I said, "Oh, great." I said, "Do you mind telling me who the other one is?" And I expected them to say like their agency or something, but this is a great big company, very big company. And they said, "Well, it's you or McKinsey."
Oh, wow. Okay.
And I was like, "Well, these are pretty different options, John."
Yes. Well, you could beat them on price, I would think, but I don't know. Maybe not. I mean,
So
I don't
yeah,
want to
so
assume
sometimes you
anything.
get surprised. Sometimes you get surprised on
Wow.
the
Okay.
competition,
Yeah.
and it's one of these things like you think like that would be your first thought, right? You could beat them on price, but the flip side of it is McKinsey's probably in there working on $100 million deal, and they're very willing to give away, I would suspect, the little positioning part of that for free
Oh, okay.
because
That's
they're working on this bigger thing. That's what I would do if I was McKinsey,
yes. Yeah, 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 yeah. I
you
got you.
know.
And they probably have some brainiacs who do what you do, but they're not you.
Well, I mean, this is why you should pick me. Like they got some guys over there, and they're good at doing a lot of things. But I bet you they don't have a person in there that's done 250 positioning workshops with B2B tech companies. They don't have that, right?
That is
So
okay. I'm so now I know who to go to. So
yeah, me or McKinsey. That's it.
okay. One of the
Flip a coin.
there's a lot of overhead over there, don't they? There's a lot of yeah.
Yeah.
All right, April, this has been so interesting and so helpful. I cannot wait to get the show notes. I'm going to go get the obviously awesome and read
Yeah.
that, and then we'll bring you back on so we can dive in further.
Sure.
Thank you so
Anytime.
much for coming on.
All right. Well, thanks so much for having me. This was great.